Nightmare tales.
Hello there, my fellow creepsters. I would first of all like to wish you all a happy and safe Halloween tonight. There are a lot of ghouls and goblins running around out there tonight. But I'm just sitting here holding my creepy deck of cards. And in my deck of cards tonight, I have an ace. Which brings me to the main event tonight, my fellow creepsters. Tonight's creepy story, Just a Scarecrow, written by ThrillShow, will be narrated by the ace himself. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Ace of Scares.
On a warm autumn night, James Garson was working on his crops as the sun was setting in the distance. He was alone on his farm. He stared up at the pink-red sky and stopped his work for a moment. He smiled. James really did love working the fields. It might be hard, but it always felt good to him. Suddenly, James heard a noise from behind him, somewhere in the low brush. He turned to see nothing but a scarecrow. The scarecrow stared at him with beady eyes that were drawn on its stuffed sack head. The wind probably just rustled him around, James whispered to himself softly. James continued to work until he was once again interrupted by the sound of a rustle coming from the bush behind him. He knew that it had to be the wind. He didn't even turn around. James just continued working. He couldn't understand why he was getting scared over something as simple as a rustle. Then, James heard a loud whoosh of plantain weeds. He turned to see that his scarecrow had fallen over. He slowly approached it and saw that the nail had fallen out. He tried to put the nail back in, but it fell out of the hole. James decided that he would just have to hammer in a new hole. James leapt away from the large straw doll and post, and trotted over to his house to retrieve his hammer. He walked in and out briskly, but when he returned to the fields that he had been in only seconds earlier, he found that the scarecrow was nowhere to be found. He saw where the big doll had fallen, but somehow it was no longer there. He looked around thinking that the wind might have blown it short ways away. He scanned the nearby area, but there was no sign of his scarecrow. Perhaps someone had stolen it, James thought. However, he hadn't been gone long enough for anyone to have taken it anywhere. He stood up and gazed into the distance as he slowly spun, hoping to find the scarecrow. The whole situation felt odd. It just seemed impossible to James that anyone had stolen it. He looked all up and down the field. There was nothing. The human-sized doll was expensive. He searched until the sky was almost black. The dim purple of the setting sun wasn't enough to let him finish his search. Defeated, James walked back to his small house. When James approached his house, he saw a dark figure sitting in his rocking chair on the porch. The figure was perfectly still. James clutched the hammer that he had carried with him. He slowly walked forward until he realized the figure was his lost scarecrow. He jogged over to it and wondered how it had gotten there. It was certainly very peculiar. Someone must be messing with me, James thought to himself. He nervously picked up the straw doll, put it over his shoulder, and began to walk it back to its rightful post. He was too tired to hunt for the troublesome miscreant who did this. James slowly marched to the post. He was walking when he felt the scarecrow snag on something, and it was yanked off his shoulder. He sighed in frustration, turned around, and bent down. Suddenly, James was knocked back in fright. The scarecrow wasn't lying in the dirt. It was standing completely straight up. It stood over 6 feet tall. James stuttered and choked in utter shock. He crawled back, trying to inch away or regain his stance, but the straw creature leapt upon him. Several weeks later, policemen gathered around a horrific sight. A fertilizer delivery man had found James earlier that day when he was making a standard delivery to the farm. James had been taken and had the scarecrow post placed in between his legs and rammed up into his torso. James's body was then stood up and put on display until the delivery man found him. After a full investigation, it was discovered that no hair, fingerprints, or DNA was left by the culprit. All the police ever found was clusters of straw.